Friday, July 23rd of 2021, 12:30 p.m. Before we get started, I'd like to ask our interpreter, I believe Nancy, to introduce herself and walk through how to access our interpretation services.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Hand. I will be the Spanish interpreter for this meeting. I'm going to give instructions in Spanish and then repeat them in English. Buenas tardes, yo soy Nancy Hand, soy la intérprete de español para esta reunión y en este momento voy a presentar instrucciones para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación. Si desea utilizar el servicio de interpretación, por favor, busque en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, que es un globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en un celular, tableta, etcétera, entonces presione los puntos suspensivos o 3 puntos, luego Interpretation y luego el idioma. To use the Zoom interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, which is a globe, and select English as your language. If you are joining using the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nancy. We will now move on to join in the pledge, please. Do we have the flag? Oh, no. Oh, there we go. So please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag. The Republic.
Stands one nation under God.
Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. And then we will now move on to the first item on the agenda, which is approval of the meeting minutes. Does anybody have any comments about the minutes? Or do we have any public members who wish to make comments about the minutes? I don't see any public hands. I don't see any other hands raised. If someone would care to make a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion by Mayor Vasquez, a second by Bob. Please call the vote. Tessa?
Chair Zito.
Zito, yes.
Vice Chair Vasquez.
Vasquez, yes.
Ms. Nickerson.
Yeah, Wong Nickerson, yes.
Wong Nickerson, I apologize.
Right.
I'm new here. Mr. Halpern.
Halpern, yes.
And Mr. Monson.
Monson, yes.
That item passes unanimously.
Great, thanks. So now we have on the agenda time for public comments. Do we have any public member comments or public comments? I do not see any.
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any public comments at this time.
Great, thanks. Do we have any member comments, board members that wish to comment at this point? Wave at me or raise your hand. I see none. So we will then move on to the Chief Executive Officer's report, and that will allow me to hand it over to you, Hassan.
Thank you, Councilmember Zito. Thank you very much, members. Mary, good afternoon to all of you. Update you on a few things. We just came out from a long board meeting, and that was a first of its kind to discuss things first time. So it was an interesting discussion, and on to continued public policy debate. But today we concluded the public hearings on the regional transportation plan. I want to thank you all for continuing to spread the word, and I also want to ask you to tell us if you think we should go to any group in San Diego or any city. I want to thank Councilmember Zito and his colleagues on the council by inviting us last week to have a discussion with the city of Solana Beach. We tremendously enjoyed the discussion and appreciate opportunities to talk to any stakeholder that wanting to listen on the 5 big moves. So my team and I are ready to do that. I encourage everyone to take the time to look at the regional transportation plan and all the things that comes with it. We are truly trying to And it's really working, trying to be an example to the rest of the state and the country of how you move forward in an environmental and economically sustainable way, while respecting all the other things that come with it. It's not easy, but it's doable. And I think San Diego will do it as an example. Second item I want to update you on is we hired Cisco to look at the digital divide that we spoke to you about. And the board earlier this year unanimously adopted a resolution to overcome the digital divide. And here I want to give a shout out to one of our team members, the director of Future Mobility and Innovation, Antoinette Meyer, and her team, by engaging Cisco and others in the community to make sure that we are true to not only the equity statement, but we are true to the resolution that the board adopted on the digital equity. There is this time giving the importance of having access to the internet, and a good access, affordable access, is meaning having an access to an opportunity to a job. So the transportation is not just about driving a car, it's more than that. It's having access to opportunities. So the Cisco is helping us conducting interviews with community leaders to figure out what ways can we as a region, what mechanism we as a region need to deploy to overcome the digital divide that exists in a big way. And you know, COVID-19 was a horrible thing for our nation, for all of us, but we learned a lot of things that we knew before kind of, but it really highlighted that we have a divide. We have a big gap between the have and the have-nots. And Sandag will do everything possible to make sure that that gap is closed. And I'm happy to tell you that we're the first in the state to have a pilot of the dig it once policy. Remember, we talked to you last time, we obtained funding and the county partnered with us. And so we're gonna put 18 miles of conduits on the 67 immediately to reach communities that otherwise wouldn't be reached. That's just an example of what this means. Let me report on the sad news. You all heard, and I sent an email to the board members about the bike rider who passed away due to accident collision in Balboa Park in Persian Drive. My heart goes out to the family and friends of the person who lost their life. Our team at Sandag knew that person personally. This is one person too many. This is a reminder that we must move quickly to achieve safety. And we must move quickly as an agency if we're having a bike program to either do it right or tell the public that, look, you're taking your life in your hand. You as leaders of this policy committees and as leaders in the community know that striping a lane and saying here is a bike lane is not enough. So this Persian bikeway is been delayed quite a bit. I'm grateful for Mayor Gloria and his city staff now that pay attention, SDG&E. We're gonna work to finish this 2.8 miles separated bikeway. So what happened to this rider never happens again. That's why I'm going to the board in the next few meetings, starting in September. I'm going to be asking them to move the bike program, which is a standalone right now, into the major corridors. I'm further ask them to actually amend or change the ordinance to increase the 2% share to 3%. So we can be true to what we're saying. Obviously, if the board do that, then we'll have more funding and ability to move things. If not, that's a board decision. But this is a tragic thing that happened by one person losing their life. We're gonna bring all the safety improvement we can to make sure that never happens again. Yesterday, the workers for the Mid-Coast celebrated their achievement, rightly so, with the second Vice Chair, Satullah Solis. I want to thank them for the amazing Mid-Coast project that's nearing completion. I also want to inform you that yesterday we went to the social equity group. We put on the table somewhere between $8 and $11 million that we're going to be using to pilot either free youth passes, frequent services, bathrooms in some stations, shuttle services. This is making the equity statement more than a statement. We're putting money where our mouth is, and we're using this $11 million to pilot certain things that would bring social equity to a whole different new level. We're going to ask that the social equity group, we're putting ideas on the table, but they're not limited. They can tell us to do whatever they think is appropriate for the community. They want to hear from the community. And I want to thank Councilmember Moreno for chairing that committee. Last week, I took a trip with Mayor Gloria to Vegas. It was 111 degrees, so it wasn't bad, going from 73 to 111. But the goal of the trip was to actually see the Boring Company, Elon Musk Boring Company tunnel that Vegas hired the company to do from the convention center to the strip. It's about 1.8 miles. I visited their trial tunnel in Hawthorne with then Mayor Faulkner. And, it was a shaky ride. I didn't think with the cost they were talking about, it's possible. But actually, we went there. We were in an X model Tesla, riding that tunnel. Here's what's impressive about this: 1.8 miles with 3 stations, one of them underground, 30 feet down. And the cost, $53 million. Compare that to the next bid of $300 million or $1 billion for 1 mile for the connector. Obviously, this is not a transit tunnel, but this is what we mean by flexible fleet: a driveless, shared, electric mode of transportation. That's eventually they're going to be developing a shuttle that carry 12 to 15 passengers that will be driveless. I think it's not going to replace the fixed guideway transit, but this could be a feeder service. And the fact that it worked, the fact that they did it since 2019 and it's operational in service, carried 100,000 people is amazing. So the hope is the future technologies in transportation will continue to advance. The good news, for the first time, we actually did receive $43 million directly from the state budget to implement sustainable community strategies. This is something we worked for 2 years with the administration to tell them that if you ask agencies like ours to come up with ways to reduce greenhouse gas emission and build affordable housing, you need to give us money. They did. We're going to combine it with local monies, and we're going to design an incentive program for willing cities. Again, we have no land use authorities, but for willing cities to work at making sure that we move our sustainable community strategy forward. Finally, I want to talk to you about the return to the office policy and the vaccination policy. As I told you before, all employees have started the return to the office starting June 1st, but all employees will be fully in the office by September 7th. No exceptions. Obviously, I'm not a popular guy with my staff right now. This was probably 95% of them would say, what are you doing? But I felt very strongly for the agency's sake, for who we are as a public agency, we needed to be in the office. I also, this week, had a policy, vaccination policy. which require all SANDAG employees to be vaccinated when they come back. And the exception is legitimate health or religious reason that will be dealt with case by case. That vaccination policy will be effective 45 days after the FDA give a full approval of the vaccine, which is imminent right now. If those employees who do not have a legitimate excuse and don't want to be vaccinated cannot be working for SANDAG. That's the policy. We had a discussion at the board today. I don't have authority to tell the board members or the public what to do, but I can tell the board member and the public, if they come into SANDAG, they will be asked whether they're vaccinated or not. If they said yes, great. If they said no or didn't answer, we'll assume they're not. And in that case, they have to comply with the state health orders, which is wearing a mask, social distancing, etc. The debate's still out whether the board of directors could take an action to make this is a policy for the board. I don't have the authority to do it, but I wanted you to know that's what we did for the staff. I received many comments from many colleagues, frankly saying thank you. I mean, we're and by the way, we're not the first government agency. UC system require all their employees and students to be vaccinated. Is there a risk? Yes. But, you know, every time we leave our homes, we have a risk of getting hit by a car or doing something. I think the good news is more than 90% of our employees are vaccinated. And to protect that 90% and the health of everyone, we have to do that. Chair Zito, let's conclude my reports. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Hassan. A lot of good news, and appreciate your and staff's effort on behalf of protecting the board members and the members of the public through the vaccine. We'll start with if there are any public member comments on the executive director's report.
Thank you, Chair. I do not see any public member comments.
Okay, I see board member Wong Nickerson's hand up. Would you have a question?
Yes, I have a comment. I want to thank Hassan about the revigorate the bike program. The cyclist who passed away was a dear friend and colleague of mine at San Diego State, so it was a huge loss to all of us. So, and I saw the SANDAG immediately after that, send out some messages to talk about the bike program. So I really appreciate that leadership. I agree with you totally. You know, one death is too many. So thank you for, taking leadership on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Board member Halpern.
Thank you. Yeah, that tragedy is kind of a sad reminder that one of the focus areas of the recent ITOC triennial performance audit was in fact safety. And one of the recommendations that came out of that audit is reference the notion that safety is kind of a decentralized thing from a policy perspective in our region and at SANDAG itself. And there's a recommendation that SANDAG perhaps consider some version of like a safety czar to sort of centralize the thinking and the planning around safety, kind of within one person or one office, more so than it is right now. And I'm just curious when tragic events like this happen, if that evolves your thinking a little bit, or would that be too much of a mission creep for SANDAG to go that much further in the safety area?
Mr. Halpern, I don't think it's a mission creep per se. I think we have to be true to our words. When we say one person too many in this case, we have to do something about it. It sounds good, but it would sound really bad if we don't follow up. So I don't consider anything mission creep if it accomplishes the goal of Vision Zero. And I also will tell you as your CEO that I do not believe that we should just force these bike investments when we know for sure that we're not fully complying with all the safety measures that we think. I mean, look, striping a street and saying it's a bike lane is not enough. If we either do it right or don't do it at all. Because then if we don't do it right, we're misleading riders by saying, go ahead and ride, or have your kids ride, or have your kids bike to school. So Mr. Harbin, I don't oppose centralizing this, but at the same time, I wanna first let the board members know that this would require funding. And once we get this funding, we need to figure out what's the best way to go and implement the bike program. I believe this program has been underfunded for a long time. I also believe it has met a lot of delays, and I'm being selfish by saying this, but that's not the fault of Sandag. When you do a bike program with local entities, it always, everyone has an idea how to do it. You know, and the engineer, the poor engineer will probably be the last person to have a word. We want to do it right, and we want to be upfront with the public about the safety. So I'm not saying it's far-fetched to have a safety czar. I think we need to do it, period. And if the board provides the funding, we'll talk about the best way to move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. And yeah, thanks again. This topic was discussed at the transportation meeting a little bit as well. And I'll just read your, make a couple of comments that I made there too, which I'm wholly appreciative of the expanded scope and effort, and hope the board decides to move forward with it, because one of the fatalities that has occurred this year was unfortunately also in my city of Solana Beach, and in a fairly well-designed, reasonably safe area, but it's very difficult, and we need to bring all of our tools and toolkits to bear. And the executive director's comment, it is important that the facilities be designed correctly, that we do, because, for example, one of the fatalities that occurred in Encinitas last year was in a protected bike lane. And so we need to make sure that even if we go down the routes of building these infrastructure, which we need to do, and we need to do as quickly as we can, that we do it correctly, because even doing certain things, even taking partial steps, can actually make danger increase as opposed to making it safer. So looking forward to the continued discussion and expanded investment in this area. Being an active cyclist myself, and anxiously waiting until I get to bike back to Sandag in September. That'll be, see if it's gotten better with the new Rose Creek Canyon Trail there going in. Should be a better ride.
I hope so.
Thanks. With that, we'll move on to item number 4, the update from the Office of the Independent Auditor. Mary, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. I'll be brief. I just wanted to announce that we did hire a new employee to replace Michelle, and I'm excited to have him join us on August 3rd. His name is Tafik, and he comes from MTS, and he's got great years of experience at the state, at the city, as well as at the local transportation. So this will be great for him to join our team. I think he's going to make a great asset, added value to our team. We are also in the midst of hiring and interviewing for the new auditing position, the associate auditor position that we obtained. And hopefully we'll have them onboarded in September. And so we'll move right along with that. And we are in the middle of CAP testing that will come to you in September for the second quarter review of the corrective action plan around the salaries and compensation audit. That is moving along. We are also moving along on the SR 125 review, and hope to have that done in September or no later than October meeting, probably coming to you. And then the vendor review is nearing completion, and that will also come to you in September or October. So with that, that's all I have for the office. I'm going to be taking a couple of weeks off in August and doing a move. So August was a good time for me to go dark, frankly. So it just worked out well that way. So unless there's questions for me, that is all I have to update.
Thank you, Mary. Do we have any public comment?
No, Chair, I do not see any hands raised on this item.
Right. Any board member comment or questions? I don't see anybody waving at me. So then we will then move on to the main part of our agenda. Item 5, overview of the data science and analytics And I believe we'll start out with maybe Ray, or is it Ray Major, Pat Lindrum, or Cindy Burke, one of them.
Good afternoon,
Hey.
Chair Tito and members of the Audit Committee. I will be co-presenting with two other staff members, with Dr. Cindy Burke and also with Pat Landrum. And this is the second time that we're speaking to you, but I see a lot of new faces. And the data science group is probably the most technical group at Sandag. And so if you're super nerdy, this might be super interesting. But what I did try to do is I asked my colleagues to let's try to keep this at a high level so that everybody could understand what was going on. But I'm happy to present. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen. So let me make sure that you guys can see what. Let's see. Hold on. Okay, where is it? I need to get to the PowerPoint. This one right here. This one. Technical problem. So hold on, please, while we solve that.
As long as it's not a data problem, Ray.
It's not a data problem. Data is fine. This is more technology. Hold on here. Yep. Can you see it? Okay. Can you see the PowerPoint slide now?
Yes, we can, although it's not in presentation mode, but we can see a PowerPoint slide.
You know what? One step at a time. So now check this out. Now we're in presentation mode. Okay, we're here now. Thank you very much. So this is an overview of the Sandag data departments. And the first thing that, why is it not? Parham, it's not advancing. Can you make it advance? Yes. Yeah, it is, but it's over here.
Ray, would you like me to pull it up for you?
Well, I have Parham here, so I'm in good hands, but you might need to if this doesn't work.
Okay, Parham, if you go to slideshow up at the very top, you're gonna need to go to slideshow options and view by individual window. So hit that, hit options. Set up slideshow.
You need to just start from beginning. Slideshow from beginning.
If it's up on the other screen, Parham, you need to exit out of the slideshow mode that you're looking at. That's why that option's not highlighted for you.
Okay.
And then click on that slideshow again.
Let me go in the slideshow. Can you see it right now?
Yeah, but your options grayed out, which means you have it open on another screen somewhere.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah, it still appears to be in presentation mode.
Yeah, you need to.
There we go.
Hold on, please.
Or Kendall, if you want to bring it up, we can just say next slide too, because.
Parham, we'll just have Kendall bring it up and then, oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so just let me know what I'm looking at. Okay, so can you I just want to see what Kendall's doing.
Yeah, I just tried.
I've got a full screen here, Ray.
Okay, thank you. And again, members of the audit committee, I apologize for the technical glitch, but I think we're good now. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is actually my conclusion. This is the last slide in the deck, but I wanted to start with it because what we're doing here at Sandag is really transformative, and in terms of how we're using data and where we see data and analytics being in the future. And when you think about data science, it really does take a village, because it's not just the hiring a data scientist, for instance, and having that person create, amazing things with big data. There's actually an entire infrastructure that needs to be wrapped around data science. It includes everything from the acquisition and the licensing of certain data sets to preparing those in a way that we can actually use those for analytics. It includes all of the data and modeling. A lot of that is custom software that we write, for instance, for our transportation models that help calculate our GHG and VMT interactions. And then there's interpretation and analysis. And that really takes people who understand the problem domain to take that data and interpret it and say, this is what's happening in our region. And then we need to be able to push that out to elected officials and to the public to make better informed decisions. And so all of that is wrapped in quality assurance and data governance. And today's presentation is going to talk about all of these parts and pieces. So I just wanted to start out with this, even though it was my concluding slide, that really data science and everything you're going to hear falls somewhere into this continuum. Next slide, please. There are three areas we're going to talk about: data science and analytics, and I'll talk about that. Research and program management, Cindy will talk about that. And then data and modeling, and Pat will talk about that. So next slide. And these are your three staff people who will be speaking. I'm the Chief Data Analytics Officer. Cindy is the Director of Research and Program Management, and Pat is the Director of Data and Modeling. Next slide. So one of the things that's happened in the data and analytics field is that it's really come to maturity and fruition. And these are cycles of innovation. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are really what drove the economy for the last 200 years. And if you look at the inventions that happened during that time, they fundamentally changed the way that we live, the way that we interact with everything. The last big wave of technology was the whole computing field and microchips. And since the 1970s, it has really dominated the whole economic landscape, and everything has really been built around computing. But starting in 2010, we started to enter what was known as the sixth cycle, which is really defined as a life sciences cycle. It has to do a lot with biotech and AI and machine learning and drone technology, but none of this could have happened without the computing. What's interesting here, though, is that the data and the information that is coming from the ability of computers to process it is really what's driving this new cycle. Next slide. So when we look at the future and what's going to happen in this next cycle, which is approximately 50 years long, is about how long these cycles are, what's really going to drive the entire economy and the way that we live and work is infonomics. It's really the data analytics. It's the ability to take these massive data sets, these big data sets that you hear about, and analyze them and make use of them in decision making. It's also renewable energy, and you see that impacts us in the terms of for instance, our greenhouse gas emissions when it comes to electric vehicles. Robotics, autonomous technologies are going to be big in the future also. A lot of that has to do with the way that we're designing the 5 big moves. And then of course, healthcare and genomics, which really drive biotech, and that will fundamentally change the way that we live. But this is what's driving the future of the global economy for the next 50 years. And the data science department here at Sandag is in its most nascent form, but we're super excited because we are part of this next revolution. Next slide, please. So what data science really is, it's taking these modern tools that we have have been invented over the course of the last 10 or 20 years and different mathematical and statistical techniques, and really putting them together with domain knowledge to help make better informed decisions. And I just want to talk about a little bit about the stuff that we've been doing here at Sandag in the last year in our group that you may have heard about, that is really starting to trickle out, that is starting to change the way that we as an agency really put out data. For instance, one of the things data science allows you to do is really figure out what is the cause of a problem by asking the right questions. And we've done analysis on COVID during the pandemic, and you may have seen some of the analysis that we did on what ethnic groups were hit the worst. We performed exploratory data to create things like employment centers. We do modeling to figure out GHG and VMT reductions, and then we do a lot of communications and visualizations, and we'll show examples of that as we go through this presentation. So next slide, please. These are just a couple of examples of the things that the data science department has started to put out in the last year. One was a long series of COVID reports that we put out, had a lot to do with not only race and ethnicity, but we took a look at unemployment and what sectors were hit the worst. And we pushed that down geographically to understand what areas within the San Diego region were hit the worst, so that we could give that information to our elected officials so that they could really see where we needed to target funding, for instance, for programs, et cetera. And so this is really revolutionary breakthrough work. No one else was doing this type of thing anywhere in the state of California, for sure. And so we were able to help other geographies or areas also look at data and really try to understand what was happening in their region. Next slide, please. We've also taken a tremendous amount of time to try to really understand the San Diego region at a much lower level. And so typically the data that we use ends up in a model and you really don't see it, and it's hard to make it actionable at a low level of geography. But a lot of what we're trying to do, like for instance, with the employment analysis, we were putting out weekly updates on unemployment as we were going through the COVID crisis, as we had people losing their jobs all over the region. We wanted to understand where people were losing their jobs, which areas were hit the hardest. So we were putting out these type of reports, and we were in the news constantly. When it came to employment reports, we were looked at as an authority on that. Again, that's Sandag and our ability to be the gold standard of data in the area. And then on the right-hand side, you see Employment Center of Sereno Valley. The whole concept of an employment center was developed here at Sandag, and this is a mathematically derived geography. I'm not going to get into all of the details on that, but what that allows us to do is to take a look at the region from a very objective perspective. These blue dots show where the people who work in that green area live. And so this type of analysis helps us with our transportation planning. So again, this is data analytics, this is data science. Next slide, please. And what I just want to talk a little bit about is where the future of analytics is going at Sandag. So this is what my team is really striving for. If you take a look at this, this is a graph that kind of shows analytics based upon complexity versus the value of information. And at the very bottom, you see reporting. And this is what you normally see, right? You see some kind of a report. It's a hard copy piece of paper. As soon as you get that report, it's already aging. Reporting allows you to know what has happened. And just as an example, this could be, if we're looking at traffic, for instance, this could be a report that comes out on a daily basis that talks about congestion or accidents or fatalities. It's good to know information, but it's historical information. It tells you what happened. It's in the past. If we wanted to understand why it happened, then we had to start doing analysis. And if we're talking about accidents, for instance, why were there some accidents? It could have been because of a rainstorm, or it could have been because somebody was on their cell phone while they were driving, or they weren't wearing a seatbelt. So understanding why something happened requires you to do analysis. Monitoring is the next level up. It's more complex, but it has higher value. And this really talks about what's happening now. So being able to, for instance, monitor weather conditions and traffic speeds and volumes allows us to really understand what is happening in real time. And this is becoming more and more interesting and exciting as we move forward, because what happens is that this is going to allow us to be much more, put much more of our data to good use. The next one is forecasting. Forecasting talks about what might happen. So for instance, based upon what you think the weather conditions are, for instance, we could forecast like what might happen. But where it really gets interesting is in predictive and prescriptive analytics. And What predictive analytics talks about is the possibility of what will happen. And so given certain traffic conditions, for instance, like if we know that it's going to rain and we know where accidents are most likely based upon the analysis that we've done, we can start to then in real time, for instance, make decisions like, for instance, the movable signs that or the changeable signs that are on the freeways. We can ask people to slow down, for instance. And when you move into prescriptive analytics, you're really looking at situations where you're figuring out what actions should be taken. And so, for instance, if we know that on the 8th, for instance, that the sun is going to be shining while it's raining, that's a really dangerous condition, you might be able to proactively send people a notification either on their phone into their car or on these signs and tell them to proactively slow down because a potential problem is going to happen. So prescriptive analytics has a tremendous more amount of value because it's really having an effect today. So this is the direction we're going. We're working all the way through forecasting. We do some predictive analytics. I can't wait until we get into the prescriptive analytics where we're really making a difference. Next slide, please. So can you just hit it 2 more times? So the future of transportation is also really tied into data and data analytics. One more time, please. There are a lot of external databases, for instance, navigation apps, Google, weather apps, Uber and Lyft information. We have information on construction, for instance. All of this information, which is considered to be big data, eventually becomes the next operating system, or it feeds into the next operating system as we take this information, we analyze it, we understand where different vehicles are, where curb space is, and everything is starting to happen using technology. So this is a revolution in transportation that's going to happen in the next couple of decades, and it's all based upon data and data analytics. And again, that's what this team is working at becoming, is really a branch of this agency that can really do this type of work. Next slide, please. We were asked to provide an org chart, and this is the org chart that we currently have internally. And what this shows here, if you look at the green square, that is on the right-hand side, there's your data analytic group. It's headed up by me. And then you'll see that right now, under the planning and innovation team, we have the data and modeling, and we also have research and program management, which is our Cindy and Pat's team. So what happened a couple of years ago is that, like 2 years ago, is that Hassan asked me to start a new initiative, this data science department, to really focus on that and hire people to become data scientists and do the work that I kind of described in the last few minutes. And so the daily management of the data modeling and research team went to Ray Trainer under the planning and innovation team. And that was a change that was made when we had an organizational restructuring. When about a year ago, when the chief operations officer position became open, I was asked to manage those two groups again. So they had reported to me for probably 3 years prior to that. And so they again have reported to me for the last year. And so I'm managing them right now, although officially they're in the planning and innovation team. So that's the current organizational structure. Next slide, please. So in terms of, and I was asked to show these slides too. So in terms of the data science and analytical department, what we were planning on building was a team of principal data scientists and business analysts. Like I talked earlier about the importance of the knowledge of the business problem domain. And so this is really some principal level people who are data scientists. They're people who understand the problem domain, and with some researchers, economists, et cetera, and then really doing the math. And so we would be doing all of that forward-looking stuff. So we have 5 vacancies right now. I have one person who is in an administrative role, which is Michelle Posada. And then we've got 2 interns that we're working with right now, producing a lot of the reports that you see through our guidance. So we have 5 positions that are vacant here. So I'm going to ask Cindy, which is the next slide, to describe her group.
Good afternoon, everybody. So in my area of research and program management, I have 9 staff who are actually on Our team right now, that does not include research assistants, which equates basically to interns, individuals who are just getting out of college or finishing up a college or graduate degree and want to get the experience. In that applied research area, we have criminal justice research, which is unique to some of our municipal planning organizations, and that we have been doing that for 40 years. But basically for that, or the applied research staff, we also do applied research at the agency, which I'll be talking about more. We have a number of staff there. We also have quality assurance and quality control of the data, program management, the service bureau, and product management. I have 9 staff who are on right now, and then I have 6 vacant positions. So about 40% of the 15-member team that I have under me right now is also vacant.
Pat, can you go over your organization? And Kendall, could you just click the slide?
Thank you, Ray. Again, Pat Landrum, the Director of Data and Modeling here at Sandag. Our team is structured in 4 key areas. We have a data solutions, a GIS team, an economic and demographic analysis and modeling team, and then a transportation modeling team that is, we really break that out into 2 key areas. One is the development of the model, the software development aspect. The second is the application of the modeling tools, the analysis, the performance metrics, and so forth, special projects. And currently we have 36 full-time positions budgeted. On staff now, we have 27, and currently we have about 9 vacancies. That includes staff that have either recently departed the organization within the past couple of weeks, and those that are set to depart in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So I am including those that are departing the agency as we speak. So that's about a 25% vacancy percentage across our entire organization. This team is made up of a wide range of different types of talents, very unique. We have GIS professionals, we have transportation modelers, we have also some research analysts and data scientists mixed in. Very diverse team, very talented. A lot of demands on this group of teams to produce much of the data, much of the outputs, much of the mapping that you see in many of the products that we produce, and many of the performance metrics that are used in the regional plan, the environmental impact report, as well as special projects and capital improvement projects. With that, I believe I will throw it back over to Cindy, if I'm not mistaken.
You can do that. I just wanted to make one quick comment. So one of the things I've talked to my team about is that we need to be ready to lose even more people from our departments, and just being completely honest about this. These are some of the most sought after skill sets in the economy right now. If you're a data scientist or you have analytic skills like this, you're being recruited. And I anticipate that we are going to be losing more of our staff just due to the way that the job opportunities are out there. And so what we've done is we are recruiting for all of these positions. Currently, we have them basically, we're putting them up as open until filled. And so we're actively recruiting for these open positions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Cindy.
Great, thank you.
You say next slide.
Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit, since you saw our staffing overview, you got a sense for this, but as I said before, we have product management, program management, data QC, data dissemination, performance monitoring, the service bureau, and then all of the original research that we conduct at the agency falls under my purview. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to talk about those five general areas, just starting out with the Criminal Justice Clearinghouse. For those of you who might not be as familiar with it, it was created in 1977, and about 80% of the funding does come from grants that we bring in. We're either rewrite the grant or we partner with a member agency or a local community-based organization. 20% comes from membership assessment. All of our staff have gone through law enforcement background checks. We sign confidentiality agreements for the data that we do have access to, including crime arrest data. And we have extra safeguards at the agency as well. We have data sharing agreements with our criminal justice partners because we take that the sensitivity and the sensitivity of that information very seriously. Any of the information that we do put out that has personal identifying information is always presented in the aggregate, and we take a lot of effort to make sure that all responses are anonymous and confidential in the work that we put out. Next slide. These are just some examples of the products that we put out. And if you're not on our mailing list, we'd love to share those with you. We really strive to do what we call action research, putting data out in the most timely fashion that can help inform policy discussions. We have over 41 years of crime in the San Diego region. I'm not sure if Argis has come to speak to you yet, or if they will be in the future. But the difference between Argis and criminal justice is Argis is somewhat the library for the information, and we offer that historical context and analysis, including at the regional level and at the jurisdictional level. Next slide, please. These are examples we put out monthly CJ flashes again, and this is with our membership fees. We really try to tie what's going on locally to national statistics about best practices. Again, we think of our stakeholders as both the community, our elected officials, anybody who wants to know what's going on. And for anybody who's been following the news lately, there's really been an uptick in violent crime, ghost guns, for example. And this is one of our most recent CJ flashes, looking at homicides in the San Diego region in 2020, looking at motive, for example, use of firearms. And so again, we try to really put timely and relevant information out. Next slide, please. Again, some other ones, looking at crimes against elders at the time of COVID. We compile public safety budget information, which is something that a lot of our jurisdictions find very helpful to understand how much each jurisdiction is spending on public safety functions. And if we didn't put the data together in a way that compared apples to apples across those jurisdictions, the data would not be available. We look at arrest statistics, and then the InfoBits reports that come out of SANDAG do fall under my area. We did one looking at mental health calls for service. We understand how the pandemic's affected so many individuals' mental health, and we try to, again, look at how law enforcement, especially at the time of public safety reform, is addressing those issues. So again, trying to get information out for informed discussion. Next slide, please. The other research, so this is the second area. I have staff who, and actually it's one person, we just expanded the team to two, to help look at, compile all the information that informs our models. Household travel behavior surveys, it's great when we can use big data, and I'm sure Pat will be talking about that, but there's also sometimes the level of information that we need that is more specific about why are people going where they're going. We work closely with other similar sister agencies around the state and the country to understand best practice. And many times we do work with consultants to conduct this research, and we oversee and ensure that it's valid and reliable information that's being collected. We have traditionally conducted the household travel behavior surveys every 10 years, and we're trying to look at doing those now every 2 years to make sure we have more timely and relevant information when things are changing so quickly. We also offer survey and research support to all staff at the agency to make sure that we're consistent with how we're operationalizing variables. We want to be consistent. We also oversee the onboard transit passenger surveys, the before-after studies that are many times required. For example, with Mid-Coast going in, COVID messed us up last year, but we're working to make sure we're meeting those requirements to make sure we understand what is the impact of the capital projects that we're building, and are we actually getting people around the region in a more efficient and effective way. And then we also contribute or oversee a number of other studies. Just some of our most recent ones was looking at cross-border travel. We worked with our consultant and then did an info bit on telecommuting to better understand how many employees are expected to go back to work after the pandemic is over with. We're working on a study looking at parking around the region, again, to help inform our models, as well as a commercial vehicle survey. Next slide, please. Performance monitoring is very important, and that relates to, we took this over from the planning department. One of the reports that went to ITAC and Kimley Horn is a consultant that's worked on something called the TPM. We want to really try to standardize how we're doing our measurements, make sure it's a streamline, that we're not recreating circles, that we are leveraging our resources. So my team now has worked on the state of the commute for several years. the passenger counting program, and also performance monitoring for the regional plan. And we're looking at how can we streamline that. There's other efforts that Ray may want to talk about, where we're trying to look at how there are these standardized measures over time and how are we really using information. We don't want to check a box. We want to make sure that the information that we're providing to everybody, to elected officials, to our boards, to community members, is actually measuring, are what we doing making the impact that we hope to make. Next slide, please. This is one of an exciting partnership that we worked on with Pat's team, and it's with Caltrans data looking at PEMS data. We started out doing info bits, and we had 4 of those trying to see, everybody could see, anybody who had to drive to work pre-COVID knows what rush hour traffic on the 5 or the 15 look like. And we know what those traffic volumes have looked like since the pandemic, and many people were working from home or not having a place to go to when we were in the higher tiers. This is now a highway tracker that we update monthly. For the first time, if you haven't checked it out, in June 2021, our VMT was actually 2% higher in June 2021 than it was in June of 2019. And our average daily traffic volumes at the hot spots in the morning was the same in June 2021 as June 2019. The data is behind these beautiful graphics. So anybody who wants to get in there, and that speaks again to our wanting to be transparent and sharing information with anybody who wants to get in there. We're working very hard to create more data sharing agreements, and again, making sure that everybody has access to what we're working with. Next slide, please. Again, just some of the examples of the info bits. We looked at the effect of the pandemic on bike riding, and shared some information about how many, the increase in bike miles that have been built across the region, cross-border travel, and then again, the telework report that I mentioned. Next slide, please. So it's great, all the data I think that we put out there. We have a long history of doing that. But in the past few years is when, after our plan of excellence went into place, was when, and under Ray's direction, that he realized and recommended that we really needed to have more formalized processes for peer review processes, as well as having an Office of Quality Assurance and Quality Control. And I'd like to say that for both of these efforts, it's really something that's evolving. We want to do best practice. I said this before, we don't want something to just be a check in the box. And we take this very seriously to make sure that if we're putting information out there, and we want to be a data-driven agency, and we want to create actionable information, we want that actionable information to be accurate. We don't want to put something out there that is not going to be accurate. And so it is an evolving process, as you know, with our staffing. We're not exactly where we want to be, but I'm proud of the accomplishments we have made and where we're going. If you could go to the next slide, Kendall. So what is a PRP? For anybody who's been in grad school and had to defend a thesis or a dissertation, it's akin to that, except in a more friendly environment, because Ray made a great analogy. He said, think about when you're a space person or Bezos, and you have the spaceman suit on and someone's checking, or you're going scuba diving. We want to make sure that everything's attached the way that it should be. So we want people to go in there sharing things and not trying to hide them. There's 4 different layers. The first was when we just have people who are an internal team, like our data teams. We want to say, talk about, for example, am I using the right data sources? These are the assumptions I've made with the data. We want to make sure that other people agree, and we want to make sure that all the decisions that go into getting something from a piece of data to something that's a conclusion and information that's being used to build something out has been vetted. We have interdepartmental, which could be planning in our data teams. Interagency could be when we have, for example, if we're working with Caltrans on a project or an outside consultant. And then tier 4 is our most rigorous. And that's when we actually bring in outside experts. And we say, we want you to critically look at this information. And again, we want it to be something where everything is documented. Can you go to the next slide? I think it's still PRP. So I want to talk a little bit more about PRPs. Next slide, please. So since March of 2017, we've had 130 PRPs that have been completed. 71 of those have related in some way to the regional plan, and 17 of those are that most rigorous tier 4. This PRP was pre-COVID, so we're not violating the mask policy there, but we send out information ahead of time. We want people to have a chance to review it. We document everything with minutes. We have those minutes available for anybody who wants to review them. We create action steps. we share that information to make sure that if there's an issue that needs to be addressed, it goes up to the next level so that people can see that. And if something, an action is recommended but not taken, we want to document that also. So we're continuing to refine these processes, but we do think that they have had some very positive effects over the 4 years now that we've been doing them. Next slide, please. And our quality assurance and quality control team right now, it should say dedicated team of data analysts, because I have one data analyst there and 2 vacancies that we're trying to fill. But what's unique about this is it's individuals who have the same skill sets as many of the individuals who are working on the data, as R, Python, SPSS, SQL, and GIS. And they meet with the individuals who own the data, for example, an EDAM, which is under Pat's group, which does our forecasting. And we come up with test plans for the data. And then it's that extra set of eyes that goes in and critically looks and then documents. The work of our QA team was reviewed by the ITALK auditors, and we got very good reviews. There were some definite areas that they talked about with trying to do more risk assessment so that we're not just QAing the data that comes to us, but how can we make sure that we're being as proactive as possible. As we're trying to be a data-driven agency, we want to make sure everybody at Sandag has data literacy skills, and that any data that are being used to the degree that we can, especially those that are impacting decisions, are reviewed through this QA/QC process. Next slide, please. So since the QA/QC team was put together and came under me, 82 different reviews of data sets have been completed in 2020 and 2021. 24 of those were related to the regional plan. Some examples are multiple reviews of the regional forecast versions for parking data, both the assumptions and the calculations. So when you think about a PRP, it's when a group of people are getting together and we're not actually digging into the data, but talking more about looking at the results. Why is it this way? Why did you do the assumptions? This is actually somebody going into the data and saying, did they do this correctly? Were there any errors in a cell? Were there different versions of a database? How can we make sure that all the information is correct? We looked at the ALK model calculators that are used as part of our regional planning process, air quality conformity calculations, the revenue and expenditure assumptions for the regional plan. And then we're also very knee deep right now in making sure, again, even though the draft regional plan is out, there's some things that are still going on. We're still continuing to review it because we definitely want to make sure that everything that we're putting out there is accurate. Some examples of findings and results over time, over these different efforts, we've been able to share. We don't want to just find an issue in one database. We also want to then use that as an education opportunity for the staff to make sure that there's best practices to ensure that we have standards set up so that those errors or opportunities for errors are not something that continues to happen. So for example, with spreadsheets, ways to provide clarity, traceability, and reduce the potential for error. Anyone who's written syntax knows that there's ways that can be more efficient or not efficient. So improvements to SQL query logic, establishing new techniques for the QC of smaller geographies when we're working with those forecasts, and then also establishing project charters and checklists so that we can, again, have standardization whenever possible. Next slide, please. Over to Pat. So I think we're going to do questions at the end. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm going to provide a brief overview again of the structure of the data and modeling department, and then I'm going to go into some details on what each of the teams do, the products and services that they provide. So the first item here on this slide is data governance. Data governance is a relatively new process for Sandag, an outcome of the 7-point plan and plan of excellence. We currently have one interim data governance staff person assigned at the principal level. This is really something I want to emphasize is a key agency-wide resource need. The next team is the GIS solutions team. That is broken out into what we'll call enterprise GIS, regional GIS services, application development, and GIS support for the entire agency. We then have our economic and demographic forecasting and modeling. That's where our regional growth forecast is developed. Our annual socioeconomic estimates, as well as we serve as the regional census data center. There's an official capacity in coordination with the Census Bureau. And a lot of economic analysis is performed, particularly in support of a lot of RAISE teams initiatives on some of the, especially the economic impact studies, as well as benefit cost analysis and economic analysis to support the regional plan or other initiatives, as well as capital improvement projects. Then we have the transportation modeling team, again, as I mentioned previously, broken out into two key areas, the development side and then the application side. And one of the new initiatives that we have upcoming is the final bullet under transportation modeling is a rapid strategic model, which is really something that we are embarking on to be able to do higher level order of magnitude analysis, so we can then leverage the heavier activity-based model in a more judicious manner, so to speak, so that we can leverage that more efficiently because that particular tool set takes about 3 days to run. Next slide, please. So digging into data governance a bit, as I mentioned, in response to the 7-point plan and plan of excellence, beginning in 2019, we initiated what we'll call phase 1 of our data governance effort. It really was about doing an assessment of the current state. How is SANDAG or not performing data governance activities well or well in certain areas? What kind of structure did we currently have? Also, developing recommendations for process improvements and workflow improvements. And a key outcome was a data governance manual that really provided a roadmap for us to embark on what we will call implementation and mainstreaming of data governance throughout the organization. A key part of that as well is the data supply chain management roadmap. That really talks about, it really focuses in on how you bring data into an organization, how you, the intake, the extract, transform, and load processes, moving it into the staging environment and into production, and all of the key QA/QC checkpoints along the way before making that data final and using it for production purposes, whether it's in our forecasting and modeling tools or in data products and reports, or publishing in the public domain. The second phase, which we are currently undertaking as we speak, at the beginning of July, we executed an agreement with our on-call consultant, HNTB, with their sub Eckerson. Eckerson is the same team that worked on our phase 1 effort. And now we're really focusing on policies, both at the board level and administrative level, to drive how we as an organization implement and manage our data governance practices. The expansion of a data council. We had an interim data council as part of phase 1. Now we're looking to expand that throughout the organization in key areas, because we really need to focus on not just data science and analytics, data and modeling and research and program management data. We have a lot of business data, we have HR data, finance data. So there's a tremendous amount of data that we really need to implement a formalized data governance process around. And so that data council will help drive that and govern that overall process. Supporting that data governance council are data stewards, data owners, subject matter experts. So we're really looking at an entire set of governance processes as well as the structure around it. A couple of key additional elements of phase 2 will be an information portal where folks in our organization and externally can go to look at how we are governing data, the information around it, data cataloging, the architecture behind the data. And then again, on the data supply chain side, a formalized and automated supply chain tracking system so that we can identify every data set that we bring into the organization at what stage it is in the development from intake through production. And then when we need to bring that data set in the future or retire it as it meets its end of life cycle. I have included a link on this slide to our data governance SharePoint site. We also have information, particularly from phase 1, on our external website, and I can provide additional information around that documentation as needed. Next slide, please. Moving into the GIS solutions team. I'm going to break this out into kind of 4 key areas. The first is the enterprise GIS. That's the infrastructure and the systems behind how we manage all of our spatial data. That includes our land inventory system. Subsets of that are all of our employment inventory, buildings, all of the standard geographies from building all the way out through the entire region. So you have census geographies at the block group, tract level. You have our custom geography, which is our atomic unit of geography, which we call the master geographic reference area, and many other geographies that all, our data needs to nest to perform much of that analysis to produce the data products that we publish. We also have a data library for all of our internal users by thematic category, elevation data, land use data, cartographic layers, many different layers for all of our users internally to access, both through GIS software as well as programmatically in the forecasting and modeling tools. One of the most recent additions is a regional 3D base map, which is a really fine asset that we've built over the last couple of years. It includes elevation data through regional partnerships to collect LiDAR for the entire region, that buildings inventory I mentioned, and really is going to help with our scenario planning and all of our visualization efforts. Part of that enterprise GIS are public-facing GIS servers. We currently have 2 of those, and I've included the links here. We provide a wealth of information in the public domain that is heavily accessed, particularly from partner agencies, as well as public and private sector and academia. Just a wealth of information, spatial data for you folks to use on a regular basis. We have what's called ArcGIS Online for Organizations. That is a Esri cloud-based platform, a very collaborative environment. We've used it very successfully on a number of different capital projects, as well as the regional plan. It also includes a suite of application templates and tools and data enrichment tools. So it's really a very good complementary system for our on-premise infrastructure. This one is cloud hosted. And then the GIS services. This is the team that produces the analysis, the mapping, the applications. Many of the maps that you see, almost all of them, come from this shop. Very talented group of GIS professionals. And really the modern GIS professional now is you have to think of it from the standpoint of not just making maps. These folks are data scientists. They're very talented individuals that need to wade through a tremendous amount of different types of spatial and non-spatial data and be able to code and script and use GIS software and web mapping applications. Next slide, please. The second part of our GIS solutions team really focuses on regional GIS and is primarily driven by a memorandum of agreement with the San Diego Geographic Information Source, or SANGIS. SANGIS is a joint powers authority between the city and county of San Diego. Under this memorandum of agreement, SANDAG's responsibilities are to host the regional GIS data warehouse, for which we have over 25,000 registered users currently, again, across a wide spectrum of public, private sector, academia. We have an open GIS data portal, as well as a parcel lookup tool that we collaborate with the County of San Diego and the Assessor's Office on. And then under the regional GIS umbrella are also a lot of regional collaboratives, very successful over the past 10 to 15 years on imagery consortium. The last 2 projects have leveraged funding from over 30 different agencies in order to provide ongoing updated high resolution aerial imagery for the region. The aforementioned LiDAR elevation acquisition project, which was the first of its kind in this region, resulting in a high resolution digital elevation model, contours, a number of other products. That was the first of its kind again, and just a really solid project, again, partnering with nearly all of those same 30 agencies, not just member agencies, but other water districts, school districts, and a number of other entities, tribal nations as well. And then one of the keys as well is the development of a metadata standard. through a working group through the San Diego Regional GIS Council, we collaborated and developed a uniform metadata standard for all GIS data in the region, and the majority of our member agencies have currently adopted and are using that standard. All of the configuration files and documentation are available on the Regional GIS Council website. Next slide, please. Moving into our economic and demographic forecasting and modeling team. This again is the team that generates our annual estimates, our regional growth forecast. This data is published to what we call Data Surfer. Data Surfer is a self-service application where you can access a number of different data sets by vintage, by various geographies. We also have census data included on the Data Surfer. There are interactive reports and downloadable PDFs, as well as an API for folks to access that data programmatically should they desire. Next slide, please. A key aspect of what the EDAM team produces are the outputs from their efforts are actually the inputs to our transportation modeling application. Those sub-area allocations at that MGRA level are what are fed into the activity-based model. Those key data points are population, households, housing units, and jobs. And what those ultimately are turned into is a synthetic population for the entire region and all of the sub-area forecast characteristics that are included at the MGRA level. Next slide, please. Moving into transportation modeling, on the development side, we use an activity-based model. It is a framework that is also adopted by a number of our peer MPOs, not just within the state of California, but across the nation. It is state of the practice. It does undergo extensive peer review. We have been undergoing a level 4 peer review for the activity-based model for the last 3 cycles. Our current version is ABM 2+, version 14.2.2. The code is open source. It is available on our GitHub site. Sandag's GitHub site for ABM includes all of the ABM code and documentation. Anyone can, I shouldn't say anyone, it's not for the faint of heart to go ahead and download this and run it. We have one of the preeminent transportation model development people in the nation, Dr. Wu Sun, and we're very, very fortunate to have him. And this code, all the documentation is available in the wiki. I've included the link here should you want to explore that more. Next slide, please. Again, on the development side, and Cindy alluded to this in her presentation a little bit, the activity-based model takes a tremendous amount of input data, household travel behavior surveys, onboard transit, census ACS data, journey to work information, regional transit ridership, cross-border surveys, commercial, et cetera. There's just a tremendous amount of data that is utilized as inputs to the model. What we're currently looking at is some of the big data that Cindy mentioned that Ray had alluded to. This emerging data, such as location-based data, particularly on the transportation system performance side, is something we've embarked on over the last couple of years. We had some small pilot projects where we have acquired data. We recently executed a contract with Streetlight Data Incorporated, one of the leading transportation system performance data providers. And we are under that 1-year contract, we are looking at evaluating how we augment, complement, or replace some of these data sources that are very, very expensive, very, very labor intensive to acquire and produce. So we're really focusing a lot on some of that emerging location-based data. Traditionally, we've used a lot of speed data, traffic counts, transit passenger counts, occupancy classification surveys, and again, this emerging location-based data. All of this goes into the development of the model for calibration purposes so that we can ensure that what we are estimating matches back to what we have seen for ground counts and observed data. Next slide, please. So on the modeling analysis side, this is the team here really takes that model and provides a lot of analytic functions. Again, I mentioned earlier, this model takes about 3 days to run. Some of the key projects and initiatives that the model is used for include the Regional Transportation Plan and the accompanying Environmental Impact Report. Inputs are, as I mentioned previously, the outputs from the Regional Growth Forecast and Sub-Regional Allocation, as well as program policies such as pricing or transit fares, network assumptions, projects, types of projects, and phasing, both highway and transit, as well as active transportation projects. Key outputs for the regional plan include 3 big compliance measuring points that we need to hit for a fully adopted regional plan, including conformity with SB 375 GHG reduction, federal air quality conformity requirements, as well as Title VI social equity requirements. We also use the model for corridor studies, again, program policies, network alternatives, and for custom analysis, we'll also look at different land use scenarios. For example, for Service Bureau or special projects, when there's a community general plan update or local development proposal, we'll use a customized land use scenario that is indicative of what type of development and what scope that development project will have, and then measure the outputs as they relate to what the base case or no build scenario is. Some current major projects we're working on, in addition to the regional plan, are the Central Mobility Hub, Route 11 Otay Mesa East, as well as the Lausanne Corridor. Next slide, please. So very high level, I don't want to get down into the weeds, but this is a very basic look at the flow chart in terms of how our modelers actually take data and inputs, and then what flows through the model, and then ultimately what is produced as output. I won't get into too much detail here, but this information is also available on our ABM GitHub site. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it back over to Ray to wrap up our presentation. Ray, back to you.
Well, thank you very much for your attention during this presentation. I know there was a lot of details, but really just in conclusion, like I told you when we first started, this data science stuff really takes a village. And today during this presentation, you heard all the different aspects of data science that are included here at Sandag. They go all the way from data acquisition to the data dissemination. They are all managed and run by this particular group. And we are here to answer any questions that you may have. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ray. Thank you, Pat. And thank you, Cindy. Great presentation. Lots of very interesting detail, and really appreciated all of the focus that was given to things that might be interesting to this group too. First, I would go to any public member comment or public comments. Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment?
I do not see any hands raised on this item, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Then we will move on to the board and board member Wong Nickerson.
Yeah, I want to thank you, the team, Ray, Cindy, Pat. Did such a wonderful job presenting. I mean, this is a very complicated, very comprehensive operation. I'm very, very impressed. And also the work is really important, right? That, you know, I also appreciate Sandag's commitment to be a data-driven organization. So I actually have 2 major questions. So let me ask the first one. I am actually surprised to see the number of vacancies that you have, and that's a very high percentage. So I'm very curious, and from your perspective, you know, what what can we do, or what are the barriers for recruiting as well as retention? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think the talents are very important. You know, you need people to do the great work you're trying to do here.
Sure. So those numbers they may look a little bit misleading in terms of how many there are. There really are that many openings right now, but you kind of have to take a look at what happened in the last year or two. So what happened was when COVID hit and we shut down, the agency and everybody was working from home, we also eliminated positions from the budget and we stopped hiring people. Okay. So those data science positions were in the budget. They were taken out of the budget. So we didn't have them for the year during COVID. The board of directors just approved additional funding to add some of these data positions back into the budget. And so now all of a sudden we have the positions open again. Our HR department is inundated with other openings too that they're working on hiring. So a few weeks ago, and this is going to the second part of your question, a few weeks ago, Hassan gave us permission to go out and recruit our own positions. So Cindy, Pat, myself, and Michelle, my assistant, are essentially posting these jobs. So if you go to LinkedIn, for instance, you would see 22 data science jobs there that you could apply for here at Sandag. To date, we've gotten 669 resumes, and the four of us are going through those resumes, and we are going to start to be bringing people in. So I hope that by September, because there's still a hiring process. After we do all of the interviews, we would then hand over the applicant to our HR department to onboard them, and that would take a couple of weeks. But I hope that by September, we start to see a real influx of new talent into our group. And so you are actively recruiting all those positions.
That's great. Thank you. So it's really a matter of timing that you just get new funding, and in time, hopefully you'll get the full staff on board.
Yeah. Yes. And we're super excited. I think that if you take a look at some of those positions, they're super key positions to moving us forward. I think from a proof of concept perspective, I think what we have shown in the last 2 years, even with extremely limited staff, is that data science has a place here at Sandag, and that the type of information that we can, and analysis that we can do on top of the data that we already have, is valuable to the decision makers. We can give them back to our elected officials, and they can make better decisions for their jurisdictions.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I might add just briefly,
sure.
We are very fortunate, especially on the transportation modeling side of the house, where we have over 100 years, well over 100 years of experience, and that experience is at Sandag. And so we're very fortunate, but we need to be mindful about that recruitment and retention aspect in terms of competitive salaries, the type of work environment that our future staff will be a part of. So we do have some challenges. And we really like what we're seeing in terms of the interest from many folks who are interested in coming to work for Sandag. So we're very hopeful that we'll find some great candidates that we'll be able to bring in and keep for the long haul, just as we've had on the modeling side of the house.
But with that said, we will have problems bringing in some of the higher level people just from a salary perspective, because we are government and our salary ranges are not what the private sector is paying for these type of technical jobs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And my second question, I believe is under Cindy's area. One of the function is to do performance monitoring, right? Including there will be performance monitoring for the 2021 regional plan. My question is more the process, like who decide what kind of things you're measuring and reporting on? What is that process? Like who get to decide that? And does it go through the board or different type of committees?
So this is the first time that my group's been doing it. So we historically we worked with the planning department during this transition period. My understanding is that some of those measures are mandated by state law. So we have to look at things like water quality. We are dependent sometimes on outside sources. So we try to get the most valid information source we can, the most timely information source. But a lot of times we're going around. It's like when you think of any type of report, which is similar to the SDG effort that I mentioned. Did you tell the group about that?
No, but I'll talk a little bit
Yeah,
about it.
it's a partnership with UCSD, and it's a global measures of how well are we doing on like 275 different variables. So it's something, the issues touch on crime, and it's different things with like pavement quality and BMT and greenhouse gas. So I'm happy to share. It's one of the appendices that is in our regional plan. So the information is out there. We definitely want to continue, and I think we do have wiggle room in how we can do some of it, but some of it is mandated. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, that particular effort that we didn't really talk about it very much, the SDG effort. So the current, as Cindy said, the current things that we monitor, we get direction from our planning department in terms of what needs to be monitored in these different areas to meet state and federal mandates. But there is this global initiative that UCSD is really driving to measure things consistently throughout everywhere in the world. So they're working with universities and different government agencies everywhere. And it is about 275 different measures. Now, we probably won't collect all of those, but we will be the clearinghouse for this type of data for the region. And what I'm doing is really, pushing hard, and well, we won't implement it unless we can do it the way that we need to, which is be able to take those indicators, whether it's a homelessness indicator or mental health or whatever it is, and be able to push it down to a geographic level that is low enough that a jurisdiction can use it to really do planning. So for instance, I want to be able to give, for instance, Mayor Vasquez information on Lemon Grove for these indicators. As a member of Sandag, I want her to be able to get the value of what we're doing here from the data, but at a geographic level that makes sense to her as she runs her city. And so that's kind of what we're doing right now. Is we're working with UCSD. We're going to collect the data. We've hired an intern from UCSD who's working here full time, and then we've assigned a second intern to that in terms of the data collection effort. So that's what's happening with the indicators. But lots more to come with indicators because they're very important. Because they're what really helps us measure whether or not we're making true progress, and it also helps us measure if we're making progress against other regions also.
Okay, good. Yeah, so that's helpful, and I'll be definitely interested in learning more, especially the performance measurement, specifically related to the regional plan, because it's a 30-year plan, and no doubt there are a lot of milestones and different kind of outcome or expected outcome to be measured against. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bob, I believe you're next.
Well, again, I'm going to follow Agnes and say thank you to all three of you. I just am kind of overwhelmed at what you guys have put together and what your staff is working on. So I want to thank you for that. I am glad to hear that you are in the process of hiring staff on to fill some of those vacancies. I know when I first went through the slides and I saw that was a little concerning to me. And so I'm glad to hear that. My question, and it's more of a kind of clarification question for me, and I believe it's directed toward Pat. This relates to the transportation modeling, and you mentioned, I guess I call it a set of data. It was called emerging location-based data. Can you give me some examples of what that is or what's included in that?
Sure. That general category would be things that come from, for example, cell phone data or fleet data that is transmitted and collected by big data providers. And ultimately they have algorithms that they develop to then produce information about how the system is performing, whether it's origin destination data from one part of the region to another by a certain type of trip purpose, or average daily traffic or congestion on a roadway. Typically that data in the past has been collected by sensors in the roadway. And then ultimately, whether it's commercial vehicles, for many years we're using bending plates, right? And they were sensing that data, collecting that information, and utilizing that for count purposes and vehicle classification purposes. It emerged into loop detection along the roadways. Then ultimately, you see some of what look like in tandem with some of the cameras on some of the poles along some of the highways. That's how technology has emerged. Now it's really coming from cell phone tower-based data, nav system for fleet vehicles. And so that emerging data really is kind of that next generation of data that's coming our way. And what we need to do is evaluate the utility of that. How accurate does it measure up to observed count information or observed conditions information? And so as that data emerges, we have to be very careful about how quickly we leverage that to ensure that it really truly does represent what the actual conditions are for a given type of system.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Pat. Again, thank all three of you for the great job you're doing. And that's all I had.
Great, thanks, Bob. Stuart?
Thanks. Yeah, going back to your introduction, Ray, I guess I would characterize myself as like sort of an aspiring nerd. So the level of sophistication of the presentation was kind of right on for me, and I appreciate that. I have a couple of questions to follow up about the vacancies, one on the org chart and then one on the QA/QC process, if I could. First, obviously the private sector in all things is going to be able to pay more than public sector. And I know this is a particularly hot area, but I'm curious, I believe that there was a recent update to the sort of salary ranges and whatnot that was presented as part of the budget for the year. Was this issue that you're describing, Ray, this phenomenon, not something that was taken into account in the salary studies that were done, given we're talking like a whole bunch of people who are really mission critical?
These groups were taken into account in the salary study, and many of the technical classifications were moved up in pay grade so that we could be more competitive. However, the market right now is incredibly hot. And so we're trying to hire right now when everyone else is trying to hire data scientists also. It's one of the hottest fields out there. So I don't know that we will ever be truly competitive with the private industry. But as far as the adjustment, yes, they did make that adjustment. I think we're going to be able to bring some good candidates in. I think where we're going to have the hardest time hiring is at those higher levels when we start to try to hire PhDs into some of the principal roles that we're not going to be able to really afford them. And my anecdotal information is that PhDs that we have on staff right now, who we've hired right in from school, and they're like an analyst level person, are being offered significantly more money than we're paying them to take jobs that are a higher level. So we essentially train them, and then they go find a job somewhere else for 40% more money. And so we can't compete with that. So that's part of the problem that I think we're going to be running into here.
Yeah, and one thing, if I can add, in terms of the process, our technical teams met with our human resources department as well as the consultant that was doing the classification and compensation survey. And it was really important for us to lobby very hard to do that, because some of our classifications, I mean, you can only imagine, transportation modeling is a very unique field, and there isn't a large talent pool to pull from. And it doesn't align with private sector jobs unless you're in that specific field, or public sector jobs unless you're actually another MPO that actually performs transportation modeling. And so it was very important for us to really educate both our human resources department as well as the consultant, so that we could really define how they should look at different classifications and the salaries associated with those, and the types of job duties that they had, not just the technical skills, but the specific duties and how they relate to what the mission of their respective organizations or companies are. So we did work very hard on that. I would say that we are part of the way there in terms of what we aspire to in terms of a technical track within the organization. And so I think that will take some additional time, but I think this was a good step in the right direction.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad to hear you felt that, at least it sounds like you got a certain degree of responsiveness. But also related to that, I'm a little bit concerned. I think it's great that you've gotten the green light to go ahead and do your own postings, your interviews, because I can imagine HR is really backlogged. But then when you mentioned that after you do the interviews, there's still a process for HR to process and all that other stuff. I don't know if you were listening in, but last month we had fairly significant discussion with Mary Kay about some of the difficulties she had kind of post the interview stage, where she actually lost a couple of candidates after they were kind of passed off to the HR department. And there were some speed bumps there. And I guess hopefully maybe you can chat with Mary Kay, or maybe there's some of those speed bumps have been flattened out, but I'm just concerned that the overwhelmed HR department is going to be still overwhelmed to process all the people that you start bringing in. And we just don't want to lose people. So maybe that's more of a statement than a question.
Yeah, and so we're at the beginning of this process right now. We have an agreement with them that as we find a candidate and we want to bring them on board, that we'll pass that candidate's name over to HR. They will make the, they'll do the negotiation for salary, and then they will do the onboarding process. I don't know what would happen if we brought 22 people on at the same time. I understand what you're saying, Stuart. There may be a problem bringing on that many people. I don't know. I don't believe that we have the bandwidth to do that. Mary, did you want to say something? Because I see that you turned your screen on. Okay, no.
Maybe offline you can consult with Mary.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna concur with Stuart that I would just think, and I'm sure you and Hassan would agree, for an agency that's data driven and these positions are so crucial to that success, that this would be, like audits, frankly, a hurry or a priority in making sure that not only we capture the skilled worker and get the advertisement out there as quick as possible, get the interviews as quick as possible, and get them on board as quick as possible. I know, if they're looking and they're actively looking, a day could make a big difference between them saying yes and they're ready to come to them saying, no, I received a better offer. So I just think that, maybe streamlining some of the unnecessary steps in HR or steps that just aren't as crucial should be looked at and considered to try to get these individuals onboarded. And also, hopefully, I haven't looked at the salary study yet, but hopefully, Ray, if you're correct, and that these individuals were considered in that study. And I shared in my audit report around these specific types of jobs that we really do need to offer some kind of an incentive above and beyond what government would offer these individuals, because it is such a specialized field and we need them for this agency to be successful. That's all.
Unless anybody wants to respond to Mary, if I could just two other questions actually. So on the org chart, I'd say I was just a little bit confused about the who's sitting with what looks like are underneath P&I as opposed to underneath you, Ray. And the reason I bring this up is, for those of you who, like me, really enjoy reading audit reports, the city of San Diego came out with a really compelling one last night, which is about this 101 Ash Street debacle. And one of the major contributing problems there was that it was a real estate transaction that the due diligence kind of fell through the cracks because there was the acquisitions group thought the real estate asset management group was supposed to do it, and the real estate asset management group thought the acquisitions group was supposed to do it. And so then you have this tens of millions of dollars of just debacle. In any case, so I'm just a little bit curious. I wonder if you're cognizant of the fact that you've got these two what seem to be very related and interactional groups seem to be sitting in different places in the org chart, or because you're cognizant of that, you're managing around it, or help us understand that that itself is not a risk.
Well, I think that the second part of your statement is accurate in the sense that I believe it is a risk in the sense, well, it's a risk in the sense that when I put up that slide that showed that this data science is the village, the data science group that we're trying to build cannot function without Pat's group and Cindy's group, because Cindy's group is the one doing all of the peer reviews, all of the QA of the data. Pat's group is the one that processes the data, makes sure that it's governed, and then and even the contracts for bringing this type of data into the agency. So the group that I'm building right now is really a customer of these other two groups. So there's an incredible amount of synergy there. The thing that's lucky for me is that both Pat and Cindy are consummate professionals, and we work great together. Even though the reporting relationship right now is not a permanent one, it's a temporary one. Again, this is one of those things that we were supposed to fill the COO position after Laura left, and it's been a year now that position has been open, and so I've been managing this group for over a year. But then again, it's not unfamiliar to me because I was managing it for 3 years prior to that.
Yeah, and if I could add, I think that point that Ray just made, the last point, was that when we organized under Ray back in, I believe, around 2017, we began down this path to really look at the quality, the accuracy, the transparency, the governance, while also thinking about the science and production and dissemination. And so functionally, we have been working in that direction regardless of what it said on the organizational structure. So that, that roadmap, so to speak, that we all work together to build initially is something that, yes, there's been minor, some adaptation along the way. We haven't fundamentally shifted the focus of how we operate and who we are actually relying on and how we work together. So that functional or operational aspect has been something that's consistent along the way, which has been a good thing.
Okay, good. Well,
The
again,
glue that's kept us together, so to speak.
yeah. Okay. So, like I said, maybe it sort of works more smoothly and coherently than the separation might appear on the org chart, and because this is all about just managing risk. And like I said, in that one kind of horrific example I mentioned, the falling through the cracks when you have two different groups reporting to two different people sometimes creates risk. But I hear you. And let me just.
But Stuart, it all reports to me now for over the last year. I mean, over the last 5 years, it's reported to me for 4. So there is that consistency there. That risk could occur. I don't want to minimize the fact if the groups diverge in different directions, that would be a problem. So it does require great communication internally to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Right. Okay. And then my last one, if I could, really appreciate the granularity on the QA/QC stuff. And I know that you mentioned that the minutes of the Tier 4 peer reviews and whatnot are available. But I'm just curious if there's a little bit more in the way of public transparency of, for example, is there clarity and transparency on what things get what levels of peer review? And particularly in the case of the Tier 4 ones, is there some transparency on who are those outside experts and how they're chosen, other than me kind of going through and trying to dig through the minutes to find it if I was interested?
If you were interested, I'd be happy to share that information with you. We have it available internally in an organized system. We haven't gone in at that level of detail and shared it with any of our working groups or our board. We right now, we have, in terms of the experts, we've been able to pay some experts coming in. Some it's been like peer organizations, academic individuals who've been able to donate their time in kind. We definitely want to make sure there's no conflict of interest when we do that. We have paperwork ahead that they do about making it very clear. We want to make sure they don't have any vested interest in the outcome either way with the work that we're doing. So I'd be happy to share that information with the audit committee if you'd like to see that, just for the tier 4s or a list of all our PRPs. We are, as I indicated, as you saw with our staffing right now, we just went out to the our executive team at Sandag trying to share these PRPs and QAs, because quite honestly, a lot of it now is people coming to us and asking us to do it, or Ray will be involved and say, should we do this? So we're trying to really change the organizational culture at the agency so that it's a standard practice. And then if we do get the too many requests versus what our staff capabilities are, again, trying to institute some type of standardized way. We haven't come up to that yet, where is the greatest risk? If we have greater demand for the review than we're able to do, how do we do that in a way that we're mitigating risk, again, to the greatest degree possible?
Great. And maybe just final thing I'd characterize this as a little bit of a suggestion, perhaps. I do think greater transparency on the PRPs, particularly the tier 4, and who the people are, because part of what a lot of this is about is the public confidence is really reliant on the execution of this plan of excellence, right? And there's, I think, great confidence because of all the great work you've done, but the sort of the remaining piece of that puzzle is to just demonstrate that that the tier 4 peer review process is one with integrity, that there are, you know, I mean, that the cynic might be thinking, well, yeah, you know, Sandag's paying a bunch of guys just to agree with them type of thing. And just by having the transparency, you give the public the ability to get the kind of confidence that I think you all deserve. So
I think that's a great idea. I'll work with Ray, and we'll work with Mary Kay on that about figuring out the best way to disseminate it, that if we put it on the web or somewhere else. But I think that's a great idea. Thank you, Stuart.
Okay, is that it, Stuart? Okay,
Yes,
thank you, Stuart. Mayor Vasquez.
Yes, I don't want to take up too much of your time. However, I want to take this opportunity to thank Ray and Cindy and Pat for this very in-depth presentation. And the one thing as an elected leader that really speaks to my heart is data and facts, because what I know is that through data and facts, you can build trust through truth and transparency. And so I know that data is absolutely necessary in creating policy and programs, not just on a regional level, but also on a local level, as mentioned earlier regarding the city of Lemon Grove. Now, I want to find out from you, as we are moving forward with the 5 big moves, you know, what or how much weight does data and facts have as we continue to look at the 5 big moves? And so I'd like to know the impact of the data that's prepared through your office.
Okay, so for the first time ever, we used a data-driven approach to developing the 5 big moves. In the past, historically, what we had done is we had taken the list of projects that were in Transnet, which was an ordinance that had a bunch of specific projects that needed to be built, and we put those into the plan saying that needs to get built, and then we kind of filled in around the edges to figure out what else we could do with the revenue that was coming in. So for the first time ever, we sat down and we said, let's take a look at San Diego completely differently. Let's understand how people move around the region, where they live, where they work. And so that's where we created these new concepts of things like employment centers and understanding how people move through the region. And we used cell phone data to help determine the number of people that were moving and how far they were moving around the region. So all of the infrastructure was, or the information that we created in our group was given to the planning department to help them make better decisions in terms of how to design a new transportation system. And that's what became the 5 big moves. We're probably, in my mind, we're probably 30% of the way there, maybe 20% of the way there. What we did was we did a proof of concept that data can be used for better planning purposes. My hope is that as we move forward to the 2025 plan, that we will be even more data driven and we'll be able to make even more objective decisions. There's still a lot of subjective decisions that go into alignments and things like that. But as we get more and more data, we'll be able to provide that to the planning department, and they'll be able to make more objective decisions. In terms of data that's in the plan, if you look at the plan is 4,100 pages long, not including the 3 chapters, the colorful one that people can read. Most of that is data and data appendices, and it talks about revenues, and it talks about costs, and it talks about projects and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of data in there that came from our group. Now, not all of it did, but a lot of it is in there, and I'm very proud of the work that my team did in terms of the underlying forecasts that go in there, the impact of densification of the region in terms of these mobility hubs and how that would impact things. We did additional forecasting for that. So there's a tremendous amount of information in the regional plan that is data, and it comes from this group. And again, like I said, by the next cycle, what I would hope is that our data science department here at Sandag becomes the model for the rest of the state in terms of how to do and apply data and data analytics to these type of transportation plans, because I think we're far ahead of where the other MPOs are right now.
As elected leader, I think that this kind of information is critical in making good decisions, decisions that will really help to move Sandag, but also, cities as well, in the right direction, leaning towards the future and our future needs. So again, thank you so much for this presentation. And I just want to let you know that I am one of those who, when it's time to weigh my options and supporting an agenda item or not, I really lean towards the data because, there's truth in data, and that truth, it's transparent. And again, if we can operate through truth and that we're transparent, we can build trust with the public. So that's my comments, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Vasquez.
Okay. Thanks, Mayor Vasquez. Don't see anybody else up on the board. I'll go ahead and throw in a couple of questions, try to make it reasonably quick since we're close to the end of our time. I guess the first question, Ray, for you maybe is just, relative to your open positions and the need to expand. One of the things I've found being in organizations that have expanded rapidly is that processes and structures can fall by the wayside as you're bringing on lots of people. So can you talk a little bit about, do you have robust training or robust mentoring for all of these new people to make sure that we don't start diverging and doing things with lower quality?
Well, we really don't. And as you have private, you have experience in private industry. I have also 30 years of experience in private industry and growing some tech companies really quickly. And we're going to have to invent a new process of onboarding to make sure that everybody is in alignment with the processes that we need. What I'm really shooting for is I'm going to try to create a system where we bring people on instead of onesies, twosies. We bring them on in kind of like a class. Like we'll have, and I'm hoping that by September when we come back, that we may have 8 or 9 or 10 people all at the same time. And then we can work extensively with them to do the onboarding and not have to duplicate the efforts all the time. And then we can assign mentors to those groups also to help them understand what we need to do in terms of Sandag, in terms of data security, everything. There's so much that we need to do a brain dump of that I think it's going to be much easier if we do it in these groups. And so that's my hope and why we're pushing to hire a lot of people at the same time, so that we can do that. But that will again be, my team will be responsible for doing the onboarding, and we'll come up with a process that we can share with you.
That'd be great. Maybe we'll invite you back in a few months and you can tell us about it, because it is a tricky problem, but thanks. Next question is that I know, the models that we build are only as good as the data we put into it, and understanding what biases that data might have, and maybe this question's for Cindy, is important. I'm wondering, is that something that we catch in our peer review process, or how do we go about trying to dig out the biases that may be in the data that we're bringing into the system, and how that can show up as I think becoming a well-known example right now. As you look at facial recognition software, that you find that it's 50% more likely to 100% more likely to produce a false positive result on a black person's face than a white person's face, because the data that was fed into the training algorithms were biased based upon the different source samples that were used.
Yeah, so Cindy had to leave because she had another meeting at 2:30. But in terms of, we go out of our way to make sure that we have unbiased sample sets where we can. And obviously the example you're giving is a great one, but we're not quite there in terms of the type of data that we're collecting. The type of data that we collect, for instance, I mean, a lot of it is, goes back to government sources like the census data or data from the Department of Finance. And what we really need to do is to make sure that it's accurate, that it's consistent, that it's governed, that we're using one version of the truth. And when the forecast changes, that everything that is impacted about that forecast also changes. So we're doing that type of stuff. We do, and for instance, like with the sales tax forecast too, we were using, when we first found the forecast error, we decided to go and use outside vendors, and we used the consensus of 3 different, like Oxford Economics and these big economic firm forecasts. Instead of trying to create our own, we went to external sources, and then we created essentially an average there. But over time, what we've done is each year we assess those forecasts and whether or not they're biased or unbiased, and we've changed the vendors composition also, so that we try to remain as unbiased as possible. So we're looking at that type of stuff. When we do a sample, for instance, when we did our work from home survey, trying to understand whether or not employers were going to require their people to come back, most of the time was spent making sure that the 4,000 or so surveys that we did were distributed evenly by geography, by occupation, by business type, size, everything, so that what we had was a sample that truly reflected what San Diego looks like. So even at the very beginning, at the sampling stage, we look at that and try to come up with the most unbiased things that we can.
So with that example, Ray, would you then be throwing out surveys that didn't completely answer things like ethnicity and income levels and that kind of stuff, because you wouldn't be able to use that data without knowing if it's biasing you one way or the other towards high income people, Caucasian people, that kind of stuff?
So you would need, so we would need to have complete surveys, right? Before you do the analysis. If you use incomplete surveys, then you're starting to create doubt in terms of what your base really looks like, right? So we need to understand that. So we have completed surveys that we look at, and the completed surveys have to have all the
information. Okay, yeah. I just know I fill out a lot of surveys, and a lot of times those questions are optional, but for us they'd be required.
Yeah, and I would just add, the survey instrumentation, the sample size, the oversampling, all of the techniques. I think we're really looking closely at those in terms of how we make sure that in the future we can even do things better to ensure that we minimize or eliminate bias. And on the procurement side of the house, we've done something recently that we really hadn't looked at doing before, particularly with this emerging technology data around transportation system performance, as well as even socioeconomic, business point location, household information, is we've included in our request for offers actual questions that ask the vendor, how do you account for, adjust for approach in both the collection and the analysis and production of their data sets to account for biases in many different aspects. And that's something new that we started doing in our request for offers for a lot of this emerging data. And it's something we're using as a kind of a first step. When we go out about a year from now for a larger multi-year RFP, we're looking at a multi-category, multi-vendor RFP. And those are the types of questions that we really want to get to. So we select the vendors that are the most reliable, that account for biases in the way they collect, produce, and deliver their data. So that's something that a little bit newer for us on the procurement side, but we think it's going to, be a good step and be effective in compiling, the best available data that's representative of our community.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, it's a really important step. Yeah, so out of respect for running to the end of time and all of your time, I won't ask more questions right now, but I may follow up offline, and thanks in advance for any responses. I will make one comment, given some of the opening comments the executive director made in his remarks, is I do think it would be useful for the board and other members of the board leadership to understand if a policy of having to be in the office was a problem for new hires in these specialized spaces. I mean, if we're having problems hiring data scientists and we can find people remotely that might be willing to work that way, I think that if that becomes a problem and a barrier, the board should be made aware of it. Just wanted to put that comment out there because I do know, in particular for some of these specialized areas, you just want the best person, and it does seem like it would be possible for them to participate remotely and do a good job when it comes to this type of activity. Anyway, just a comment there.
I certainly appreciate that comment. I've done some exit interviews with those that I mentioned have or will be recently departing. And that certainly is a factor. It's going to be a factor in retaining in terms of not just the compensation, but the workforce environment is changing. And people are recognizing it. They want more flexibility. They want the ability to work remotely, whether it's remotely within their region or remotely from outside of the state. And so those are definitely factors, both from a recruitment and retention standpoint, that we have to be mindful of.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. So with that, I will think we've hit the end of our agenda. I do once again, thank you for your presentation. It's really interesting stuff to the nerdy side of myself, and I do like seeing all of the great information. Maybe I'll try to scare myself and go to your GitHub and see what's actually out there, and get overwhelmed. But it would probably be a little bit fun for a little while. Our next regular meeting is up on the board there. It's scheduled for Friday, September 24th, 2021, as we are taking a month off in August. I wish Mary Kay great luck with her move, because I know how incredibly fun that is. Hopefully she'll get a couple down days in between there that doesn't involve that. And everybody have a great rest of your summer.
Chair Zito,
Yeah.
before you adjourn, I would just like to comment for the record that there are no further continued public comments.
Great, thank you. I hadn't seen a hand up, but appreciate it. Everybody, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.